Your credit card is not an emergency fund.
Amen.
Your home equity is not an emergency fund. So we are talking about cash, not debt. Yeah. The whole point of an emergency fund is to avoid debt. So don't think of your credit card or your home equity loan as an emergency fund.
Welcome to Stewardology, a podcast where two worlds collide. In this show, financial advisor Tim Russell and Pastor Drew Gysi are joined by me, producer Tyler Rutherford, to explore the intersection of financial stewardship and theology. Their unique perspectives help Christians and churches understand and apply a biblical framework for everyday financial decisions so Christians everywhere can grow in their walk with Christ through biblical stewardship. Before we get started, we just wanted you to know that the topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investment and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities and advisory services are offered through Genius Wealth Management, member FINRA, and SIPC. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Tim Russell, Drew Gysi, and Tyler Rutherford. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Stewardology Podcast. I'm Tyler, and I'm here with my co-host, Tim Russell.
Hello.
And Drew Gysi.
Hey, everybody.
Well, if you're new here, this is the Stewardology Podcast, where we learn how to handle money God's way. We're super excited to dive into today's topic, how to build a 3 to 6 month emergency fund and still have a life. It could be a really daunting task. How do we actually build an emergency fund without sucking all the joy out of our life? You see, God never wants us to be paralyzed by tomorrow, and He calls us to be wise and store up like the ant does, to prepare, to plan ahead. By the end of this episode, our hope for you is that you'll have a clear plan for how you can grow and establish your 3 to 6 month emergency fund. And you'll see exactly how this becomes applicable and practical for you to use, and in what instances it's actually going to be helpful so that we don't have to worry about tomorrow. Now, if we don't have an emergency fund, are we called to then be anxious? No, but having that emergency fund does act as somewhat of a shield for us to be prepared to meet the needs of tomorrow that we don't yet see right now. So let's get into it.
So did you know that according to Bankrate.com, 3 out of 5 Americans, 3 out of 5, 60%, can't afford $1,000 expense without going into a credit card?
Wow.
They don't have an emergency fund.
I believe it. I mean, as it's easy to believe, but it's one of those things where I wish that wasn't a reality.
Yeah, I would have to say through my years of doing stewardship reviews, and I will say even more so recently, I see the debt piling up. So I got to agree with that number. I can't say it's carte blanche across the board, but the things that I get to see, the triage, yeah, I look at the bank accounts and we see a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there. And if they have a tire blowout or a battery go bad, it's done. They're at zero or negative.
Well, you know, the Federal Reserve just showed some data. This is a little different look at the same thing. Instead of 3 out of 5, it's 1 out of 3. 1/3 of Americans can't handle in even a $400 emergency without having to borrow money or selling something.
Wow. That's
$400.
That I just saw it a couple times this past month in different stewardship reviews I've done. That it's a challenge for some people just to be able to have the money last a month. I get that.
The reality is if you don't have, let's say you're 1/3 of these Americans that don't have the money to cover a $400 expense, and let's say your car breaks down and it's going to be a $2,000 expense. Well, then how do we pay for it? It's going to be debt. Right?
Yeah.
If you don't have the resources, it's going to be debt in which you will pay interest on. And there's a number of things that can lead us into these uncertainties, right? Maybe it is a car breakdown or accident. Maybe it's a government shutdown and we don't have a paycheck for a month.
That never happens.
Never, ever, ever. Maybe it's health concerns. You know, Drew last episode talked about how expensive cancer treatment can be, or maybe you lose your job. Or what if it's something that is, maybe it seems minor. Your roof has a little bit of a leak in it. And one thing goes to the next and goes to the next and goes to the next. Now, next thing you know, you have $10,000 worth of expenses. You have no idea how you're going to cover it other than putting it on a credit card and paying 30% interest.
It jumps me right into the verse that we've shared many times on this episode, Proverbs 22:3. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. I think it's so important as you see these things that are going to come your way. Let's prepare. Let's plan. Let's look and see. Let's not think like the ostrich does with the head in the sand that problems are not going to come your way. They will. Tim, you shared this last episode, the sucker punches of life. They happen. Are we prepared when those times come? And that's where not just an emergency fund, but a 3 to 6 month emergency fund steps in and helps you put the right pieces together so that you can keep your family focused and moving in that right direction.
So that's important to recognize that we need to have that reserve, but at the same time, we're Christians, we are creatures, we are created beings, we are not God. We do not control everything. So we have to, at the end of the day, trust in the Lord. We do need to do what God calls us to do. We do have to save. We do have to prepare. But we ultimately must trust ourselves, our lives, our families, and our finances to the gracious hand of the Almighty, that He might work out the plans that we have and provide, obviously, for us, even when our plans fail.
Yeah. Amen. So you hear this term thrown around often, 3 to 6 month emergency fund. And my hope for this next section is that we can clear some things up. All right. So 3 to 6 month emergency fund. What does this consist of? Is it income or expenses? 3 to 6 months, and we'll get to that in a minute, but is it of income or expenses?
Well, the answer is it's expenses, not income. Now, the reason for that is because if you're doing it right, your expenses should always be lower than your income. You must live on less than you earn. That is the inviolable rule for financial success. If you live on less than you earn, you have margin, you have the ability to save and store up for the future. So think about what are your expense categories. You've got your let's just talk about your charitable giving, money going to church, how much is going to mortgage, how much is going towards your tax payments,
utilities.
What are you doing for utilities, food on the table, at debt finance payments. All of those things are part of your core budget. That's your expenses. So you add up 3 to 6 months of those numbers to get an emergency fund. The idea here is that if you were to lose your income, you could get through 3 to 6 months of those expenses without having to miss a beat. The reality, however, is that emergency fund is not just if you lose your job. That's clearly an emergency, but it's also what happens if your roof does spring a leak, or you do need to fix your car or replace something. The money here is designed to somewhat be variable. It grows with your expenses so that you can handle larger bills if and when they come due without having to dip into debt.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's the idea.
Yeah, it's hard too because you build up this emergency fund and you're like, my roof leaks and it's $8,000 to get it fixed, and I don't want to dip into this thing I worked so hard for. But the reality is, I'd rather dip into money that I have versus paying interest on that expense.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
No.
And I think it's important to realize also, it's 3 to 6 months of expenses. We talked about that moments ago. But understand, I'd like to call it the necessary expenses. If you need to pull back on things, pull the reins back.
Of course.
Yeah.
So critical. So many people, when those sucker punches of life come through and they need to dip into this, they don't change their habits that they do. This is one of those times where instead of 13 streaming subscriptions, maybe we drop it down to 0 or 1 because you need to pull back.
All right, so the term is 3 to 6 month emergency fund. We've established that it is 3 to 6 months of expenses. 3 to 6 months, that seems like a big range. Is it 3 or 6 or in the middle? How does that work out?
Yeah. So the reason it's a range is because everyone's situation is somewhat different. So if you are living on fixed income, your income does not vary from month to month very much, then the answer is you're probably better to go closer to the 3 months, you'll probably be okay. If you have more of a variable income, this could be you're on commission, you have some other things that could be there or could not be there. You're self-employed, you've got jobs that are there or not there. Well, you probably want more of an emergency fund, maybe 6 months of expenses stored up in reserve to carry you through. So it depends on stable, regular income, lower, more variable income, higher. It also can go towards, well, are you in an industry that commonly goes through disruption? Are you in a company that's going through potential hard times where there might be layoffs in the future? If there's uncertainty with regard to your industry, with regard to your company, then you should probably try to store up closer to the 6 end of the spectrum rather than the 3 end of the spectrum to be able to kind of carry yourself through. Likewise, if there are storm clouds on the horizon, there are things that are coming up that's uncertain. Maybe there's a potential diagnosis coming. Maybe there's you're expecting a child and there's a birth coming up. Well, we want to make sure that this is a good time to be trying to store up more reserves than less reserves to kind of carry you through the period of uncertainty. Once baby's here, diagnosis is here, and it's okay, it's not going to be at the end of the world, then we can kind of spend down some of that emergency fund, pay off some debt, and keep on going with life.
I need to bring in this idea of different industries. I remember my father-in-law had his own business, civil engineering and land surveying business. I remember one time I was over at his house. I think it was in the very early years of our marriage, like probably the first year. And I remember him coming in the door. I was there. Cheryl and I were over for dinner. He popped his briefcase on the counter, opened it up. I happened to be right next to it. I looked in and I saw at least a dozen checks made out to him, spewed over to his paychecks. And I remember looking up to him and say, "Hey, Dad, you going to cash those checks?" And he looked at me. He goes, "Do you want to cash yours?" And they're like, "Yeah, I would love to cash mine." He goes, "And those checks stay right there." This young boy didn't understand that at that time, but there were some economic challenges that the business was going through. And he had to go into his own reserves to keep his company afloat, keep things operational. The business wasn't coming in because construction ebbs and flows. And It was one of those times I learned that those reserve pieces are critical. He said, "I will cash those checks someday, but right now, if you want to cash yours, they're going to stay right there in the briefcase." This young man didn't get all that picture back then, but boy, did I understand it now. And Tim, you probably understand that as a businessman yourself,
Sure.
that things ebb and flow. So we need to prepare for those times when life happens, business happens. You got to make sure that you have something squirreled away for those rainy days.
Yeah. One more thing to kind of go towards the 3 to 6 month question is if you have dual income and both spouses are working for the same company or in the same industry, or there are potential issues with the dual income all being tied to the same income source, there's probably a reason to be a little higher on that savings and reserve range. On the flip side, if you're dual income and you are in very different industries, very different, like they're both stable, they're both like no issues or concerns, maybe at that point you could justify sliding down towards the 3 month end of the spectrum. So there is some variation or impact that dual income will have on the decision as well.
And let's bring in single income. Let's say you are single. And I think a very important thing is because you don't have that additional partner, that spouse to help during those light times, I think it's very important that single person choose to, as best they can, build the higher range. Why? because things happen. And I know it's difficult for a single person to do that nowadays in this industry. But I've also met some single people, as we've done our seminar across the country, some single people that are making some amazingly incredible incomes, and they can easily tuck some money away, but yet they have not. So I think it's important, if you're single, let's make sure you have that, because for you yourself, you may be between jobs. And you need that little bit of a break, financial break, to get you to that next stop.
Yeah, if you're a single income family with kids, especially, too, make sure you slide higher on that spectrum.
Thank you. I was about to say that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So before we actually get into the how to build this fund, are there things we should do before building this fund?
So if you follow Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace, if you're looking at the baby steps, step number one is you get an emergency fund, $1,000. It's a starter emergency fund. So I would actually generally agree with this advice. Number one, no, $1,000 is not enough. No, should it be higher? Yes, of course it should be higher. But at this point, the point with Ramsey's plan is that you need to get rid of the debt. You are never going to have the emergency fund you need to have until you have control of your income. So the whole idea of $1,000 is not about the $1,000 being enough, but $1,000 at least being a stopgap between you and debt, and gives you the time to prioritize doing your debt snowball so that you can actually pay off your debts and get to the place where you can really do a reasonable debt snowball. So what that means is that you have $1,000, then you do your debt snowball, you pay off all of your debts, all of your consumer debts, except for your mortgage. So pay off your medical bills, your credit cards, your car loans, pay those suckers down as quickly and aggressively as you can so that you can get to the 3 to 6 month emergency reserves. By the way, that implies, we have not stated this, but that implies you're living on a budget, that you know what your income is, you know what your expenses are, and you're prioritizing debt elimination over other variable or elective spending items.
That's good. So once your consumer debt is paid and once you have that $1,000 saved up, you're ready. You're ready to start building this fund.
Let's rock and roll it.
And we came up with this title, How Do I Build This Fund and Still Have a Life? That last little tidbit in the title really makes me wonder, should I have a life if I'm trying to build this fund? What does that even mean? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
So it's interesting that when you think about making a product, you can have 2 out of 3 things. It can be cheap, it can be fast, or it can be high quality. You can have 2 of those, but you can't have all 3 of those together. So you think about your emergency fund. Is it going to be a cheap emergency fund, like a really low emergency fund? Is it going to be one that you get fast, or is it going to be a high quality? Well, you can't do them all. You can't do it with only putting a little bit of money towards it, and you can't make it fast if you want it to be high quality, high dollar amount. On the flip side, you can't have you can't expect that if you want to only put a small amount into it, but you want it to be high value savings, it's not going to be fast. So you have to pick your priorities. It can be fast, it can be cheap, or it can be high quality, but it can't be all 3. So at the end of the day, you can have a life. The more of a life that you have while building your emergency fund, the slower it will be, and possibly the more frustrating it will be to actually get there. On the flip side, I understand human psychology. And if you can't emotionally commit to what it takes to get to having a 3 to 6 month emergency fund because it's too restrictive, then you're not going to get there anyway. You're going to self-sabotage yourself. So I need you to be willing to give yourself a little bit of grace, allow some pressure relief valve, if we can say it that way, so you can have a little bit of discretionary spending, so you can still do something with a friend or go out to eat while you're focusing on this priority. Just know that to the amount that you do that, it slows you down. Dave Ramsey says this, and forgive me for channeling Dave Ramsey here, but I think that he's got a lot of wisdom to offer us. You need to be willing to live like no one else for a period of time so that later you can live like no one else. He says it really simply. He says, live like no one else so that you can live like no one else. If you are willing to make sacrifices, short-term sacrifices on your social life and on eating out and on the extras, you live like no one else for a year or two, as uncomfortable as that would be, as awkward as that might be to friends who ask you to come join you for their destination wedding in Aruba, and it's not part of the budget, you can't make it work. Saying no is going to help you at the end pay off your debts. You get your emergency fund where it needs to be. You can start living like no one else because you don't have all the debt that your friends who went to Aruba are still paying off. So you have to make choices that are right for you and for your spouse. So you need to sit down. If you're married, sit down as a couple and think through, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to fund it at a low amount? You want to be cheap with your allocation towards debt? Or do you want to be aggressive towards it? Do you want it to happen fast or do you want it to happen slow? Do you want it to be a small emergency fund or do you want it to be a large emergency fund? You can have two of the three. You can't have all three. So make that choice and allow your lifestyle to reflect the choice that you made.
So as people are starting to build out these funds, I think it's important to consider what is and what is not an emergency.
Christmas, totally an emergency.
Yeah,
It happens every year. I never see it
the new
coming.
iPhone. The new iPhone is a big time emergency. I got to run out and get that new iPhone every year. Every year.
My vacation is an emergency.
My vacation. I deserve it.
I deserve it.
I deserve it.
You
Drew,
deserve
you
a
do.
break.
Well, okay. So like people routinely tap into their emergency fund for things that are not emergencies. When we say an emergency, like getting a new phone is not an emergency. Black Friday sales are not, sales in general, they're not an emergency.
But it's that fear of missing out. I'm going to miss out. Well, I can just pull a couple thousand out and get that 100-inch TV that we've been dreaming of.
And save $50 on it.
And save $50. Yeah.
Yeah. So just recognize that certain things are going to be regular life expenses. When you've got a car breaking down and you've got to replace it, you've got a medical expense that, kid broke an arm, needs to go to the emergency room. They suck something up their nose or stuck something in their ear. Yeah, that's an emergency fund. You deal with that. Things that are elective, things that are consumer in nature, they're not emergencies. So I encourage you, if they're important, save for them, prepare for them. Just don't tap your emergency fund. Don't call it an emergency. Let's be honest about what is and what is not a true emergency.
The latest sale at Costco is not an emergency. Know that.
Amen.
It might create an emergency if you start spending like it is.
It will. It will.
All right, so we're getting ready to start building it. Where do I keep it? Where do I start putting dollars? Is it in the mattress, under the mattress? Where do I put these dollars?
I talked to someone recently, and that is exactly what they're doing. Literally tens of thousands of dollars under the mattress.
Yikes.
I could not believe it. Where's your house? Where do you live?
Zoink Scoob.
Yeah, so we recommend using a high yield savings account. So something like Ally.com, Capital One 360, or Ally.com, Capital One 360, Live Oak Bank, and there are many others, CIT Bank, that offer FDIC insured high yield accounts that are tied directly to your checking account. You can transfer money anytime you want. You can have the money in your checking account for you to spend within 24 to 48 hours typically. It just depends on whether it's a weekend or holiday or something like that. You obviously know banks and the time frames there. But it's pretty quick. You get that money quickly and you get a decent interest rate. So my recommendation is to do that. Keep it at a bank, keep it at an Ally Bank, Capital One 360, Live Oak Bank, CIT Bank, whatever. You fill in the blank. You do your search. Go to bankrate.com, look up high yield savings accounts and pick one that makes sense.
I actually talked to someone recently and I thought this was actually a very good move. They're actually using an online bank for some of their savings. So they're tucking money in there. And for their emergency funds, their 3 to 6 month, and even their $1,000, they opened up a secondary with another company, bank. So you use Capital One 360 and Ally. They had one of each, but the one was solely dedicated specifically to their emergency fund, the $1,000 and anything above.
Know yourself. What you need, you do that. Like for me, I have my emergency fund and my excess savings all at the same bank.
Yeah.
And I just have a spreadsheet with the balance,
great.
and it's broken down based on, like, my spreadsheet breaks down, this is how much is emergency fund, this is my annual expense fund, this is my, sinking fund for one thing or another. It's all broken out there.
Yeah.
So don't keep it in Coinbase or Bitcoin.
Yeah, no. If that's actually, I'm really glad you asked that. No, like, don't put it in a mutual fund that has stock market risk and volatility. Yeah. You want to keep it in something that's low risk. Frankly, no risk. I say no risk. Even money at the bank still has risk. We acknowledge and understand that, but we're taking out at least stock market gyrations and volatility out of it. So no, don't put it in Bitcoin. That's not a good emergency fund. As we're recording this right now, Bitcoin over the last couple weeks is down about 25% just in the last week or two. So if you needed to access money in an emergency out of Bitcoin, you would be very hard pressed to take a 25% loss on that money. You might go into debt because of that, which is the entire point that the emergency fund is trying to avoid. So don't do that.
Yeah, and inflation's a real thing too. So every few years, it might make sense to readjust based on your current expenses and all of that stuff, and just making sure you're keeping it up to date. All right.
So if I could say one more thing, what is not an emergency fund? Your credit card is not an emergency fund.
Amen.
Your home equity is not an emergency fund. So we are talking about cash, not debt. Yeah. The whole point of an emergency fund is to avoid debt. So don't think of your credit card or your home equity loan as an emergency fund.
All right, let's get to it. How do we accelerate this emergency fund? How do we make some real progress?
I think the very first thing you got to jump in and do is start a budget. If you have one, tune it up. Go through, get rid of excess fat in the budget, or maybe you just need to build it from square one. And we offer budget worksheets. Reach out to us. We'll gladly give you one. But that budget is going to clarify where your money's going, and then the goal would be to find some excess money and then give it a name. Emergency fund, 3 to 6 month emergency fund. Boom, every month that money is, or every paycheck, that money is going to that online bank account, and it's going to be tucked away there. So again, as Tim talked about earlier, you got to pick and choose. How do you want to do it? Fast, slow, how aggressive? Cut the fat, build the margin, and then that's where you're going to find those extra dollars that you can squirrel away. But that's got to be the first thing. Yeah. Take a look at income, take a look at expenses, and then get a budget line item for it and kick it out of that account, put it online, tuck it away. That's going to be your starting point.
Then you want to sell stuff. Sell unnecessary junk, have a yard sale, put it on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, get rid of stuff that you do not need. Again, I like Dave Ramsey. He makes this comment, sell stuff so much that the kids are afraid that they're next, TVs you don't need.
Can you get much for kids nowadays?
Old gaming things. I don't know. I haven't looked recently.
Yeah, it depends on the grades of the kids, right?
The FCC is going to shut this podcast.
Boy,
down.
we're done. We're done.
No. All right.
If they get good grades, though.
So we're going to sell stuff, not people. Stuff. Drew, my goodness. That number 3 is take on extra work. Do a side hustle. Work overtime. Do an extra job. Use that extra income and use it for a period of time. This is not forever. This is for a period of time to allocate towards building up that emergency fund. So do the extra work. By the way, this also is helpful if you're working on debt elimination and debt snowballs. Yeah. Take on that extra work, allocate the new income directly towards the debt reduction. The 4th thing would be to defer discretionary spending. If you don't need to go on vacation, maybe we don't for a year while we allocate those funds towards building the reserves. And maybe there's a hobby that you put on pause for a little bit. I went hunting in Maryland and I bought a license, and it was like $150 for an out-of-state Maryland hunting license. Well, if I was working on building my emergency reserves, I would probably not be hunting down in Maryland or hunting in general. It tends to be expensive. I know theoretically you can put meat in the freezer and that's going to help the budget, but you got to actually get the deer and put meat in the freezer. So
yeah, that's an important piece. Get the deer.
Yes.
Yeah, number 5 is spend cheaply. So, instead of, okay, maybe
Cheapskate.
maybe you need something, right? But you don't have to buy it brand new. You can go thrift it. One of my wife and I's favorite things to do is go out and thrift. Because you can get stuff for pennies on the dollar. You know what I mean? Clothes, furniture, all the stuff that you can adjust and change. Maybe not clothes, but like furniture, you can just paint something and it makes it look brand new. It's amazing. Don't go crazy expensive on some of these expenses.
Yeah. And then finally, windfalls, right?
Yeah.
So when you get a windfall, redirect it. So what do we mean by windfalls, Drew?
Tax refunds, bonuses, gifts, etc. Put these into your emergency fund instead of spending it. If you get a increase at your work, instead of bumping up your expenses that you're putting out the door, redirect that directly on over into your emergency fund.
Yeah, you said when you get a raise, instead of bumping up your expenses. People don't actually do that. People don't bump up their expenses. What happens is all of that income goes into the same checking account, and without a purpose, a name, a priority for that dollar, it just gets spent. It just goes away. So it's not intentional. People don't intend to spend the money. They just do spend the money.
Lifestyle creep.
That's why you give your savings a pay raise. So if you get a raise, bump the amount that you're getting extra towards the reserves.
So the windfall is not the Powerball, right?
Windfall? No, it's not. No.
Windfall.
Oh, I've been spending so much money on lottery tickets to build my emergency fund with the Powerball.
Surefire way to go broke.
Yeah, really.
So what happens once you reach this goal?
The number one thing is you got to celebrate. So I don't know what celebration means to you, but you pick what that means, but celebrate that. And then you take that money that you have redirected on over to that emergency fund, redirect it to something else that you want to do. Maybe it's a car replacement fund or something like that. You want to accelerate that. Or maybe you just want to say, okay, it's time to relax just a little bit for a season and then refocus again. You got celebrate those milestones. Very important.
So, okay, what if you're here listening to us and you don't have 3 to 6 months? In fact, you've got debt. You don't even have $1,000. Where do you start? I'm feeling discouraged. You guys are crushing my heart here. What's going on? Can I give you some encouragement if that's you? The definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing again and again and expecting a different result. If you are in the situation where you have debt, you don't have the emergency fund, you need to change up something. And it starts with you. You are the only one responsible for your financial success. You are the only one to blame for your financial struggles. I know that there are situations that are outside of our control. We talked about medical expenses in a previous episode. I get all of that. However, it does come down to the choices that you make. So the encouragement that I give to you is cheer up. There's stuff that you can do. So I would encourage you, dial back the spending. Look at the budget. Take it very seriously. Take on the extra work. Just start chipping away. You're never going to get to your destination if you don't take the first step. So if you need help, you can reach out to us, stewardologypodcast.com, and have a stewardship review to kind of at least start the process. Like, what's my next step? What do I sell? Not the kids, Drew. What do I sell to get going? Sell plasma, right? We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, sell plasma. You can get some good money selling plasma.
You do extra work so that you can get the snowball moving in the right direction. So momentum is working for you. You are never going to reach your destination if you don't take the first step. So take the step today.
Sell the kids plasma too.
Wow, Drew, you are really on that.
You're about to get canceled off this show, man. Holy cow. No, I think, Tim, that's a good word. I think, building that first $1,000 fund is really helpful because you've then proven that you can do it. And instead of looking at let's say you need $20,000 for your emergency fund, instead of looking at, I need to save $20,000, save $1,000 20 times.
Yeah.
Break it down. It's like losing weight. Instead of I have to lose 50 pounds, lose 1 pound 50 times. You can do it. Like, just take the step. You can do it.
Just don't do it. Gain a pound, lose a pound. Gain a pound, lose a pound. I did it 50 times.
Well, that's a fantastic segue. What happens when you use your emergency fund?
Yeah.
The number one priority should be replenish it.
Yeah.
Get it back to where it was. Because you used it because you needed it, and you think life is going to now not going to need it in the future. You will need it again someday. So let's replenish it. Let's go back into potentially, in a previous episode, we talked about maybe a squirrel mode. Go into that squirrel mode, get it back up as quickly as possible.
That's right. That's right. Yes, you're living on less than you earn. That means you have capacity to redirect unneeded income, not that you don't need it, but money that's not necessary for survival today. You allocate that towards rebuilding that emergency reserve.
Amen.
You know, a passage of scripture that came to mind when we were talking about this segment here is Matthew 6:25 through 34, but just verse 25 is sufficient for right this moment. It says, "Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on it. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing?" We got to save diligently. We got to tuck away diligently. We got to look ahead and see the evil of problems and things that break down and maybe having a time without a job. But the emergency fund, that's that very practical thing. But let's not overstress those things. God is still on the throne. God is still in control. He sees and knows and understands the circumstances and situation that you and possibly your family are going through. So let's not get too anxious about those things. Let's be intentional and purposeful before those challenging time comes. And remember, God's got you taken care of, and He will continue to take care of you. You just need to be faithful with what He has put into your care.
Yeah, there it is. The same God that tells us not to worry is the same God who tells the ant to prepare. We have a responsibility. We really do. So build that emergency fund. Live on less than you earn. Give generously. And when you're there, you're going to feel a lot better. You're going to sleep really well. Not that you've self-insured against every possible scenario, but you've done what was required of you. You've prepared, knowing that God is sovereign and that God will carry you through this life.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Take care. God bless. Remember, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Let's take your step today.
Thanks for joining us on the Stewardology Podcast, where financial stewardship and theology meet. We'd like to help you take your next steps in biblical financial stewardship. Subscribe in your podcast provider to get the newest episode delivered to you every week. Leave a 5-star rating and review to help new listeners find the show. Take advantage of your free personal stewardship review at stewardologypodcast.com/review. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website at stewardologypodcast.com for tons of free resources and hundreds of free episodes. You can also leave episode ideas at stewardologypodcast.com/idea. Remember, Psalm 20, verse 7, "Some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." See you next week.